Okay, in order to draw our mammals, we're going to look very closely in today's session at eyes. The defining features that make one eye a tiger's eye, one eye a human eye, and we'll look at that in detail as well as learn some tips about how to shade and tone to make that eye really come alive. Okay, so they're just going to be exercises. Every eye starts with an eyeball. So I've just drawn 4 circles on paper that we're going to use for today's exercise to help us realise the differences that we're trying to identify. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the human eye, because we look at that every day and we understand it very well. So it's a ball, as all eyes, in a socket, and with humans the lid comes down and comes up in a kind of almondy shape. We have an iris, a pupil, and the whites of the eyeball. Okay, so we can start to recognise this as maybe a human eye. We don't always see the full ball shape in its socket, but that gives us something that we recognise. And the kind of axis goes from left to right in most situations. Let's take a look at a tiger's eye here, and first thing we notice is it doesn't go from left to right, corner to corner. The corner to corner goes in a diagonal direction, and we work from there. So next let's figure out how that turns from some sort of planet looking thing into a tiger's eye. So the first thing we do is we work out how the skin, as it were, fits around the eye, and for our reference image it comes in a little bit here and comes around like this. So this is the line of the fur. It cuts across the top a little bit and then it goes out a little bit into this really dark area here. Then we have a big triangle here of dark area, and that blends into the fur. And then underneath the eye we cut in a little bit, although it's still quite rounded if we compare it to a human eye. And here we have the lovely rim of the eye that we can see because it has that lovely reflection of light in it, so we know that that is kind of a shiny rim that then blends into some fur. So here we've got this blending into some black fur markings here, we've got this blending into some black fur markings here, and we've got a few black fur markings under the eye. We'll come back to those, but let's focus on getting the eye how we want it to look. So I'm going to just rub out our line of axes. Here we've got our eye area. Now when we looked at the human eye, we have pupil and a white. Now with our tiger we don't see the whites of the eye. The whole eye is kind of like one big iris except for the pupil, so we still need our pupil in situation. One thing to note about animals is we need to get that sort of in the right position and the right proportions. I'm going to say I've made that a little bit big. I can always make it larger, it's harder to make it smaller. So I'm going to just make that how I see on the reference image the position of that. We need lots of lovely colour around here, and then this area is really quite shaded. So if you imagine with every eye the light is coming in here and the lid is blocking that light, we always get shading at the top of the eye. That is where our lids are protecting the eyes from the sunshine. Also the eyes are spherical and shiny, so most of the time we have a small area of reflection. So in our reference image, the tiger's area of reflection, this kind of shape. Okay, so this stays white. That's the whitest area that we can see in that image. Underneath the eye, we've got a lot of really heavy dark colour, and the pupil itself is obviously very dark. Before I go too far with all the different tones, shapes in this area, I want to talk a little bit about how we create tone. So if we go up here to a different part of our paper and we work with the side of our pencil, pressing hard, then lifting, lifting, lifting till it's like super light. Here we can see there's a strong tonal change with a kind of a smooth graduation. If we use the tip of our pencil, we can do the same. We move along, getting lighter, 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 to virtually tickling the paper, and again we can get a different type of tonal change. It's a little bit more difficult to perfect this technique, but just keep practicing it. Otherwise, just use the side of your pencil and lift, 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 lift as you go along into the lighter areas, and it's a little bit easier. So practice both ways, see which way suits you. So having practiced my tonal variation, I'm going to bring that technique into the eye, and what I can see is there's virtually no difference between the super dark tone of the pupil and the top of the eye. So that almost goes completely into one, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to work from dark to light, possibly about a third of the way down the eye into this light area here. I'm just going to go ahead and do that now. So once we've created that dark to light shading there, we can notice there's a little bit of shading around the pupil as that comes into the eye. So I'm going to make the definition stronger, and so the shading around that comes, and then as the eye goes around and tucks into that lower limb, there's ever such a slight bit of shading around there. So we're really starting to get the idea that this is a spherical object. So we can see from our reference images there's a few areas of light in this sort of tear duct where the rim probably comes into the eye shape here, but it's also blending in with a lot of fur, dark fur markings. So keeping the light area reflecting off the rim here along this edge, I'm just going to go ahead and colour all the rest of that in, including taking some of it into the patterned areas. So there the video cut out a little bit, but you can see where I've coloured in all the dark areas surrounding the tiger's eye, and we've left that highlight there. So just to recap, diagonal shape from corner to corner of the eye, lid shape according to your reference image, positioning the pupil with the highlight, shade to light, and then colouring the rim according to the markings. So there I think we've got a sort of a good start representing that tiger's eye that we've got on our reference image. Okay, so let's move on and work out how that is different to the wolf eyes, and so that's what we're going to try and draw next. So what I would say about the wolf eye is, again, we've got a kind of a diagonal axis going through the eye. However, the wolf's eye is much more pointed. There's almost a kind of a straightish line coming down here, and then it comes back up, and there's a thicker rim for the wolf's eye, going underneath into another kind of pointed end here. So what's surrounding the wolf's eye is much pointier at the two sides. Then we have the lid of the wolf's eye, kind of cuts across the eye more than we saw on the tiger image, and comes into that top corner. So it's almost straight across here. Then if we look really closely at the reference image for the wolf, we can almost see a kind of inner lid coming around here. So we've got a highlight here. We don't have a prominent kind of a tear duct area shown on this image, but we've got a big highlighted area here. And we'll come back to that with our shading later. But most importantly, I want to focus on the eyeball itself and practice that shading again. We've got the furry lid coming in, so we can give that a little bit of texture. We don't need to keep the ball shape, and we don't need to keep our reference line. So I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. And we see that the pupil is kind of right in the middle. We don't have any whites of the eyes for this wolf. Just going to go ahead and put out my pupil there. Do we have a reflection? Teeny tiny little reflection. So we've got one in the pupil there, and maybe a slight reflection here. Not as prominent as the tiger. And then we can just go ahead and colour in that pupil, keeping the reflected areas clear. So again, we seem to have the light coming in from above, and we've got the dark tones underneath the lid, and then dark again as the eye joins the rim. So I'm just going to go ahead and colour that, shade that, using the same techniques that we tried out on the side. Heavy, pressing hard, lighter, 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 to achieve the depth of tone that we're looking for each area of the eyelid. So I'll go ahead and do that now. So here you can see we've kind of built up a little bit of tone around the edge, and if we look really closely at the reference image, the iris of the wolf, we can see a little bit is radial. So as I've done my shading, I've taken the marks, the shading marks, in a radial direction to just give a little hint about that radial texture that we're seeing a little bit of in our reference image. Okay. And then we've already talked about this large light area here and a small light area here, and the rest is going to be shaded kind of in between those, and I'm just going to go ahead and give that a shade. So here you've got the general shape of the eye. Just going to add that sort of little bit of texture around the eye to indicate the fur, but really for the point of this exercise we're more interested in getting this idea. I'm going to recap one more time. So the deep dark pupil with your highlight, where the lid is really dark, taking that into the light area of the eye and then shading it back into the lid. Looking at the shape of the eye, we try and create what we're seeing in our reference image, whether that's a diagonal axis, pointed, blending into fur. You know, we just observe what we're seeing, but those are the kind of things that I suggest that we're looking for. Okay, let's try one more together. So the last eye that we're going to look at today is going to be the top one of the bear, and this time the bear's eye is really quite rounded. It has a very slight diagonal axis, but nothing as strong as we saw here on the wolf. Very slight diagonal axis, has a little tear duct here, and it has a very strong line here for its lid. We have a very strong highlighted rim for the under eye area. Just going to draw that in. And a gentle curved area for the tear duct. Just going to lift out that axis line and draw in our pupil. With the bear's eye, we see it's quite dark around the edge here, so we'll come and shade that more prominently shortly. But what's interesting about this reference image is the reflection. The shape of the reflection is really quite unusual. So let's have a look at that. So make sure you've got a nice sharp pencil to define the sort of finer details. It's an unusual shape. Quite often reflections are an unusual shape. Unless photographs are taken in a studio with an artificial light, then you might have a sort of a round reflection. But quite often it sort of has images of trees in there, or whatever the animal is looking at will be shown in these reflections. So they're never usually a lovely nice round shape. So I've kind of indicated something like that. And again, the same process. I'm just going to shade from light to dark. I'm going to shade the darker areas under here. Maybe I've made the pupil a little bit too big, so I'm going to make that a bit smaller here. And the rim. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that, looking at the reference image each step of the way as to where to put the shade. This time we've got this sort of darker area inside the eye with a light coming here. Just keep looking at the reference image. Where are the dark areas? Where are the light areas? And that's what's going to give you the best approach. Tear duct, kind of an ovally shape, and then this bright, very bright rim that we've got going around the bottom. A little bit of shading either side of the highlight, and then that obviously then goes into being hair elsewhere. I think I could probably work on that a little bit more to get it a little bit more accurate, but again, it's a really good exercise to practice this shading from dark to light and looking where the different shades of the eye really fall. So that concludes our session. I hope you've enjoyed drawing eyes with me today. Huge thank you for everybody that's shared their work so far. Please keep sending your work to me. I love to see the outcomes, and meantime, have a lovely week, and I'll see you next time for Drawing Wolves.